Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Friday, and all of our guests today brought to you by, that includes Kevin Woodley, hopefully standing by. We got Kevin? We're working on it. The Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Get ready for winter with an unbeatable stay at the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. This season, they're offering 25% off their best available rate all winter long on weekday stays with a minimum 2-night booking, whether it's a cozy coastal getaway or a serene retreat. Don't miss this exclusive offer. Call them directly at 250-248-8333 or visit us at BaysideResortParksville.com to book your event today. We got Kevin? We're just working on it. Just hoping to hook up with Kevin Woodley from NHL.com and the InGoal Magazine. You were talking about how there's a goaltending controversy happening in Vancouver right now.
Stop it.
Kevin Lankinen with his third shutout of the season. He's just been fabulous. You say what you want about the Canucks in their season. Where would they be without Kevin Lankinen?
In trouble.
Yeah. Well, you know what's strange about the Canucks? And there's been so much criticism of the Canucks. They're 4-1-2 in their last 7 games. I think that would surprise a lot of people. 6-2-2 in their last 10, and yet a whole lot of negativity, mostly from you, up until last night, and probably it was their best game of the season against, of all teams, the Florida Panthers, who came in hot.
And they're in a playoff spot. It's not like this team is not in a playoff spot, Donnie. They're 15-8-5. Thanks to being 10-2-1 on the road. But last night was a massive, massive win over the defending Stanley Cup champs.
Okay, we got Kevin joining us now. Better late than never from NHL.com, InGoal Magazine, Kevin Woodley. Kevin, thanks for doing this, sir. Looking good. How are you?
I apologize, boys. Technology, it is for us old guys. Sometimes you push the buttons, it doesn't work. Panic sets in.
We know all about that. Kevin Lankinen last night, just your thoughts on his performance and what it means going forward for the Canucks with Thatcher Demko now healthy.
Well, first off, just a really clean performance for Kevin Lankinen. I think defensively that was their best game of the season. And as you mentioned, against the defending Stanley Cup champions, looked up the numbers at Clearsight Analytics this morning. I kind of was talking in the press box last night. My hunch was no more than 3 high danger chances for the Panthers, and it was exactly 3. So Lankinen's been really good on the tough stuff, especially this year. Certainly we've seen him hold his team in games early with big saves on breakdowns and wide open looks and backdoor chances and all those things. But last night was one where, as he correctly pointed out post-game, you really got to credit the job the Canucks did defensively in front of him. It looked a lot more like last year's team in terms of really shutting things down. The Panthers did not get much. And when they did, especially in the third period, he was there as he has been for most of the year. So just a really clean performance for him. And listen, I know this market, and I know, having 2 goaltenders playing well inevitably leads to things like crease controversy discussions, but I look at this as purely a good thing. You've got one of the best goalies in the world coming back from a prolonged absence and an opportunity to not have to rush him back or overplay him. You have a guy in Lankinen who is not only a great security blanket, but a guy who can get you wins without having to overplay the other guy. And if things don't go as planned, he's a guy who can get you wins in a big role, in a starting role. I don't think it's any coincidence as well that when his game has started to fall off a little statistically this season, it's when they've overplayed him or played him a lot more than he's used to. And so this is the best of both worlds scenario in my mind. You get the chance to ease Thatcher back in and get the best out of Kevin Lankinen. Because I do think at times this year, as they've overplayed him, we've seen the level not fall off a cliff by any means, but we've seen it drop a little bit. And so last night's a prime example of what you get when you have a rested Kevin Lankinen as well.
You mentioned Thatcher Demko. What did you see from Thatcher Demko in his return game Tuesday against St. Louis?
We would have liked to have seen a little less breakaways. We talked about how good the defensive performance was last night against the Panthers, and the Panthers had 1.5 expected goals. Well, the St. Louis Blues had 4. So just way too much high danger, way too much off the rush, not tidy with the puck, and put Thatcher Demko in situations where he had to make a ton of big saves, breakaways. 2-on-0. I felt like I was at a beer league game. Welcome back to the NHL. Here's a bunch of odd man rushes and the rare 2-on-0. And he made some dynamic saves, and he looked explosive in those moments. Crease movement. I'm looking at movement for a goaltender coming back off a long injury, and whether it's practice or in that game, everything looked fine. There's no hitches in his giddy up. Everything is sort of how he moves in and out of his posts. All that stuff was clean. Some reads, the first goal doesn't get off the post, is in reverse. I think probably lost that puck through traffic, and that's the hardest thing to adjust to, is getting used to traffic at an NHL level. It's one of the things that makes the game so hard at this level, so much harder than any other level, is how deliberate and purposeful the traffic is. And outside of that moment, sort of losing that puck and not getting up to the top of his crease on the first goal, maybe a couple times where the reads weren't perfect, but that's just going to take time. And he said it himself, a little rusty that way. I like what I saw physically, the positional stuff. There were some times where guys were walking into the dot off the rush. There's no retreat. Like, if you're not confident, a lot of goaltenders will start to drift backwards and shrink in their net and retreat in those situations. And he just held his ground at the edge of the crease and made some really confident looking glove saves on some really good looks, from the faceoff dot against a team that has some shooters. So I liked a lot of what I saw, and I think, if that's rusty, as he described it after the game for Thatcher Demko, the chance to sort of build off it, and that bodes really well. Because as good as Lankinen has been, especially at the beginning, he was incredible. Historically, and I'm a guy who was on the Kevin Lankinen train since July 1st, that some teams should have signed him because the underlying numbers indicated this was coming. But as good as those underlying numbers have been, the ceiling of Thatcher Demko is just another level, right? One of the top 3, 4, 5 goaltenders in the league. And so if you can get him back to that level without overplaying him, while having a safety net who's been one of the best goalies in the league, frankly, for the next little while, I just run this back and forth as a rotation.
Kevin, we got a question in the Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox I want you to answer. How will losing Ian Clark affect Thatcher Demko?
I guess we'll see. It certainly affected Jacob Markstrom when he left. It certainly affected Sergei Bobrovsky when Ian left Columbus the first time. You saw dips in their performance. I have been blessed to sit down and watch video and go over sort of how he sees the game with Thatcher Demko for InGoal Magazine in the past. He's done pro reads with us, which is where NHL goalies sit down and review footage and explain their reads and their decision-making process, so that young goalies watching it can learn how to think and read the game, not just go out and be a goalie school goalie. He shared that time with us in the past, and it was a real eye-opener. I've done it with over 40 goalies, Connor Hellebuck, like some of the biggest names in the game, and the level at which Thatcher processes the game makes me a little less worried about that adjustment. I do think there are some goalies, and Markstrom maybe a little bit of this, that like they don't think the game as much as they just go play it. And so maybe you're a little more reliant on a goalie coach to make sure he's drilling in the details to the point where they become instinctual. And then when you lose that, because it's a new voice and you don't have him anymore, some of those details can slip and you start thinking like, hey, what was I doing before? Demko thinks the game at such a high level. He's such a smart, intellectual goaltender in terms of how he processes. Like, some of the stuff he sees and reads ahead of the time is like, it's incredible. It's what makes him one of the best of the best. And Connor Hellebuck's the same way. And so I think with that sort of foundation intellectually as a goaltender, you worry a little less about the dependency on a goalie coach to make sure those details are sharp, to make sure that you're just out there acting on instinct. And so anything could happen. Like I said, past, Vezina, two-time Vezina Trophy winner, Vezina finalist in Markstrom have struggled when Ian's moved on. But there are elements of the way Demko approaches the game that at least make me less worried about that in the short term for him.
Okay, your thoughts on Silovs. Start of the season, not great. Now in the American League. If they re-sign Lankinen, what does that do to his development?
Oh, it's a good question. Re-signing Lankinen's probably going to take more.
It's not that good of a question.
Good question. Kevin knows a good question when he sees a good question.
Well, it got me thinking, Don. So, that's actually probably a lower bar than for most of your guests.
There you go. Yeah.
That's goalies, right? Too many pucks in the head. Like I immediately went to what it's going to cost to re-sign Kevin Lankinen, and I think that ticket starts, and I should say starts, like this is the floor, not the ceiling. Like, look at what the top guys in the league from a sort of 1B perspective got last year, and you look at Anthony Stolarz, and certainly those are the types of comparisons, although Stolarz' underlying numbers were like best in the league, better than Bobrovsky by a fair amount. He got $5 million over 2 years. So is there an appetite here to have that on the books alongside Thatcher Demko? We'll see. If it happens, then as soon as Arturs requires waivers, it becomes a bit of a decision. And if he rebuilds his game and his confidence and his statistics in the American League this season, that becomes a risk, losing an asset for nothing when you send him down on waivers next season. But other than that, I think that's your focus in the short term. We've seen what can happen, how quickly things can change, not just here in Vancouver, where obviously we pay closer attention to it, but look around the league at how many teams end up using 3-4 goaltenders. So your priority is in the short term to rebuild some of the elements that seemed to slip while he was up here, and in large part just not playing and not being able to build any confidence or rhythm or routine, so that if you need him, which is not out of the question, he's an option for you. In terms of what it means long-term, if they bring back Kevin Lankinen, it probably means that Artur's future may be somewhere else. But again, that will all depend on what he does as a goaltender right now and for the rest of the season in the American Hockey League. There's a lot of tools there. We talked about this coming into this season. We saw what he did last year. You do not worry about his mental game or his approach. There's a lot to like. He has all the physical skill and tools. There were some learning curve things in the National Hockey League that he just hasn't had enough reps. Or in terms of traffic and managing those things, that he needs more reps. And it's on him now to make sure he makes the most of those reps in the American Hockey League, so that when and if he gets his next opportunity, it looks more like it did in the playoffs for them than it did at the start of this season.
Better late than never, Kevin. Thanks so much for this, my friend.
My pleasure, guys. Like I said, if I can't just turn it on and hit play and it goes, it's problematic for me. My kids weren't around to fix it, so it took me a few extra minutes.
You did just fine. You did much better than I would in that situation. Next time you're on, we want to talk about Team Canada's goaltending situation. But we'll do that next time.
The state of Canadian goaltending may require a double segment, boys. I got a lot to dig into.
More of Kevin Woodley is always a good thing. Thanks for this, sir.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
You bet.